Carla, I think we're ready whenever you are.
Okay, thanks so much, Russ. And hello and welcome to the Federal Government Distance Learning Association's webinar series. I'm Carla Lane, FGDLA's Vice President for the Higher Education Sector and the moderator for today's webinar. FGDLA is a nonprofit professional association formed to promote the development and application of distance learning in the federal government sector. We actively foster collaboration and understanding among those involved in leveraging technology and training for the federal government. FGDLA is a chapter of the United States Distance Learning Association. Our membership is derived primarily from individuals employed by the agencies within the federal government. We invite you to join with us if you're not already a member. Our web address is fgdla.us. A couple of housekeeping things here for upcoming events. Put July 21st on your calendar. Kelly Barrett will present on the SHOTS micro-learning series that he created for the IRS. On August 25th, Dr. Joel Schneider will tell us about his work with visual audio descriptions. What started as just a few webinars has now grown. There are topics scheduled for the following 6 months. Randy Maestri of Zoom on 9/22, the U.S. Space Command on 10/27, Dr. Say Schatz of ADL on 11/27, and Dr. Benson Opondo of the Social Security Administration on 12/15. Diamond will be back with us to talk about XAPI, and Helen Chamberlain will be back to guide us on how to apply GSA's 508. Dates on coming on those. We are so proud that Zoom is a sponsor of FGDLA and has been instrumental in helping us develop and present the seminars. We'd like to thank Zoom and Res Colbert for sponsoring today's seminar. They are the best partners we could have, and they are one of the new and valued sponsors for FGDLA. Thank you so much, Russ.
Carla, you're the best. And I just get tired of looking at that schedule that you have planned for the next couple of months. So anyway, it's an honor and a pleasure to be a part of the Federal Government Distance Learning Association and to be able to work with people like yourself and our guest speakers today. So we appreciate working with you greatly. Thank you.
Thanks, Russ. We appreciate you too. Today's topic is combining storytelling and learning theory to support effective learning. We have 3 experts from Diamond Instructional Systems. They are senior instructional designers Christopher Kaplan and Alvin Lawrence, alongside program manager Andrew Clark. The discussion will focus on how to engage learners and help them create their materials. Neurology, psychology, and education form the foundation of the content they create. They come to us with high recommendations from Dr. Fran Kassinger, who's a board member for FGDLA, for the training that they have created for the U.S. Department of the Treasury. The depth of knowledge in this area is outstanding. Chris, Alvin, Andrew, welcome, and thank you for being with us today. The floor is yours.
Hello. And my name is Alvin Lawrence, and with that, we will get started. So today's session, we want to be really interactive and engaging. So we want you all to be able to participate and feel like you're a part of this and not just watching a presentation. So to kick it off, I'd like to hear from the audience members by way of the chat box there. What are your expectations for this session? What do you hope to get out of it? So if you'll take a moment and just go down to your chat box and put in, type in whatever that you think you'd like to get out of this session. We'll take a moment to review your answers and then we will continue. Okay, thank you. Looks like we're getting some information here. Thank you, Brendan. New perspectives and strategies. Okay.
Ooh, what makes a good story?
Looks like Sarah says she'd like to learn how storytelling can be used for online training. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. So thank you guys for participating and submitting your answers. So we hope to answer those questions. What makes a good story? How can storytelling be used in online training in this session? So to kick it off, I want to go through a bit of an exercise, and I'm going to list just some names, just some words here, and I'm I want to have you just listen to what I'm saying for a moment, and in a minute I'll give you more instruction. So everyone, here we go. Melissa, Juliet, Los Angeles, apartment, Avanti, condo, Lakers, Milwaukee Bucks, John, Houston, and cousin. Let's go to the first slide here. So now, based upon what I just said, in the chat box, type how many of the things that you think you remember. You don't have to list all of the items, but just you can list a number. I remembered three, or I remembered four. Um, okay, we got four from Brendan, five from Russ. Looks like four or five from Doug there. Five from Jeff.
Jeff
Jeff
changed
dropped.
his mind.
Jeff changed his mind. He got three now.
Maybe
Maybe
two.
two from Andrew. Okay, all right, good deal. Okay, so now we're gonna try a different approach. So just again, listen as I read aloud here. So Tina and Joe have been fighting all afternoon in their downtown Philly loft. Joe just bought a pair of Koenig wheels for his Chevy Tahoe. Tina was a little irritated that he spent money on new wheels that they've been saving to get out of their loft and buy a new house. Over the weekend, Joe was celebrating the Philadelphia 76ers win over the Atlantic Hawks. Having a bit too much to drink, though, Joe jumped the curb and cracked his new Koenig wheels. Tina, hysterical over the news, called her big brother Eric. Eric, feeling the need to protect his baby sister, booked a flight from Chicago to come and confront Joe. So here again now, after hearing that story, I want to hear from maybe someone to list how many things that they can remember. Names, places, items,
Events.
events. What do you remember from the story? Joe is in trouble.
Joe is in trouble. That is the big takeaway. Conic Wheels, Chicago.
Yeah, if you want to list them out, that's great too. List the things you remember.
At least 5.
You have siblings there, Jeff? I know it. So I hope I have 5 kids, so I hope my sons would feel the same to protect their sisters. Okay. So thank you for participating in that. So why is storytelling so good at helping us to remember? Why is it so good at teaching? So your engagement, with story, just like the story you just heard, is really based upon your own interests. What puts you immediately, which puts you immediately in the driver's seat of your own learning. Stories are going to include details, give us information that we need, either about the future, or just for merely the sake of understanding, the fictional world that's being presented to us. So good stories, though, they build familiarity and trust and allow you, the listener, to enter the story where you are, which makes you more open to learning. So good stories can also contain multiple meanings, so they can accomplish multiple end goals simultaneously, and convey complex ideas in ways that you can grasp. Stories help us to engage our senses and emotions. They connect us with a story by stimulating our senses and enable us to use our imagination and feel, smell, touch, and even listen and visualize, images and pictures. So when we talk about stimulating the senses, we're not suggesting that we just jam pack a bunch of sensory related words to the point of just ignoring our learners. We want to get the trainers and facilitators to think about, what's the purpose of the story, and also how they're wanting to hear the learners really connect with it, and to be in it. So right now, what we're going to do is we're going to play 2 examples, one of a story that's told without a lot of words, involving senses, and then one that involves senses. I want you to kind of listen and just hear the difference a bit, of how this goes. So I'm gonna stop sharing, and I'm gonna try sharing again so I can play this for you, and hopefully everyone will be able to hear this when I share it. So give me a second here. Okay, here we go. So now I'm going to share again with my audio turned on. And let me know if anyone has any trouble hearing this. So here is the first example.
Once upon a time, there was a little girl named Goldilocks. She went for a walk in the forest. Pretty soon, she came upon a house. She knocked, and when no one answered, she walked right in. At the table in the kitchen, there were 3 bowls of porridge. Goldilocks was hungry. She tasted the porridge from the first bowl. "This porridge is too hot," she exclaimed. So she tasted the porridge from the second bowl. "This porridge is too cold," she said. So she tasted the last bowl of porridge. "Ah, this porridge is just right," she said happily, and she ate it all up.
Okay. So now let's listen to that same story again, but this time with the use of words to describe the senses. Here we go.
Once upon a time, there was a little girl named Goldilocks. She went for a walk in a cold, damp forest where the tall trees blocked the sunlight. The twigs made a crunching sound with every step. Pretty soon, she came upon a house in a clearing in the forest. Goldilocks could smell an open fire burning. She knocked hard on the door, bruising her knuckles. Her knock sounded hollow, and when no one answered, she walked right in, the door creaking as she opened it. At the table in the warm kitchen, there were 3 bowls of sweet cinnamon and apple smelling porridge. Goldilocks was hungry and could feel her stomach rumble with the smell. She tasted the porridge from the blue bowl. "This porridge is too hot," she exclaimed, burning her tongue slightly and immediately dropping the spoon on the floor. It made a loud clanging noise as it hit the tiles. So she tasted the porridge from the yellow bowl. "This porridge is too cold," she said, dropping the spoon on the wooden table. So she tasted the porridge from the red bowl. "Ah, this porridge is just right. Not too hot, not too cold, and just sweet enough," she said happily, and she ate it all up, her spoon clinking on the bowl as she put more porridge on her spoon.
So thank you, for listening to that. And again, just I want to hear from the audience this time. How many of you heard the story the second time and it changed what you had imagined from the first time that you heard it? So just throw it in the chat box if that's you. And you can even just give me a yay or a nay. Okay. So definitely we can see, the use of just different descriptive words and things like that can really bring us into a story and change the scope of how we see things. That was a example we used based upon just audio. Now let's take you through a text-based example, and I'm gonna have you guys, the audience, take me through this. We're gonna read this example, and I want you to see how the story unfolds, and the power of the story. So here we go. Let me share this with you. Okay, and can everyone see this screen? Just give me a no if anyone's having any trouble reading this along with me. Hopefully the text is a good size for everyone.
Hmm. It's good.
Okay. Brendan looks it looks good. Chris thinks it looks good. All right, so let's we're not gonna go through this entire story, but I want you to see this story that is an interactive example used to teach, done completely only using text. There's no audio here or anything. So last night, the Minister of Science in the Republic of Zekostan announced that local scientists had unearthed what could be crashed alien spacecraft. Today, you'll be the first foreign correspondent to land in Zekostan to cover the story. On your last assignment, you were too slow, and Agent France Press got the scoop. You've got to beat him this time. Your publisher has arranged for a guide to drive you to the remote crash site and translate from Zico for you. Now you're hurrying off the plane into the tiny airport looking for your guide. A tall, thin man is holding a sign with your name on it. He greets you warmly, saying, Brigado, Brigado. He hands you a folded piece of paper. So, this interaction here, you open it. The note says, I was originally contracted to be your guide, but Agent France Press has given me a more generous offer. Therefore, I will guide their journalists, and you will travel with my cousin, the man who bears this note. I regret to say that my cousin does not speak English or know how to drive, but he will show you the way. His name is Ludo. Best regards, Jogdor K. Ludo is smiling expectantly. Bregado, he says again. You say, so we can either choose to say, where is Jogdor? I must speak to Jogdor. Or we can say, let's go and gesture towards the exit. In the chat, really quickly, someone tell me what we should choose for this interaction. Got a let's go from Brendan. Let's go. All right, let's go. Ludo leads you to a dusty Land Rover parked haphazardly along the edge of the road. He hurries to the driver's side door and opens it with a flourish. Overhead, a plane is approaching the runway. Is it carrying the agent's friend, press, journalists? There's no way you're letting them scoop you again. You jump into the Land Rover, and Ludo eagerly climbs into the passenger seat. He hands you a key. You start the engine. The Land Rover lurches into life. Frater, Ludo says, waving his hand towards the filthy windshield. Frater, frater. So, are we going to turn on the windshield wipers, or are we going to pull onto the road and go straight ahead? We got wipers from one. Someone says straight. Someone says wipers. All right, let's go. Let's go to wipers. Bid. Ludo says, frowning. Frater. He waves his hand forward again. You turn off the wipers. You pull onto the road and go straight ahead. So at this point, we're learning something right now. So let's go. Let's pull on the road and go straight ahead. Papa, Ludo says, smiling. Frater. The road is rough, but the Land Rover handles well. You pick up speed, hoping to put as much distance as possible between you and the agent's friend, press, or usurper. Suddenly, the road stops at the T junction. Kurtal, Ludo says, waving his hand side to side. You turn right, you turn left, or you say, I'm sorry, which way? What do you guys think? Brendan says to ask. We got two people say going right. You guys just gonna wing it, huh? All right, let's go right. Oh, it's a tie now. We got two saying ask which way, and two saying go right.
Let's go left.
Someone just broke the tie. Jeff just broke the tie, so we're gonna ask which way now. All right, here we go. Kurtal, Ludo says again, waving his hand side to side. You dimly remember reading somewhere that pointing is taboo in Zekostan. So we're going to go right or left. Everyone was saying go right before, so let's go right. Bid, Ludo says frantically, twisting to wave in the other direction. Kotal! You quickly jump back up to take a T junction. You turn left. So I'm going to stop here. Otherwise, I could spend all day with this because this is a fun adventure. But you can see how this story is already you're learning. this language of Zekostan through this story. Could you imagine being sitting in front of, I don't know, Rosetta Stone or something, and just trying to learn just when someone throwing you words, versus in the story, you're being put into this situation where you have to make these decisions quickly. And that's the power of storytelling.
Hey, Alvin,
Go ahead.
I'm curious if the attendees want to take a stab at telling us what they think the word bid means in Zekostan. Ease. Bid.
So Doug says we know that bid is no and pa is good. Oh,
Yeah.
look at that. See,
That's awesome.
he's already learning
Yeah,
from
it's
the
so
story.
effective.
It is. It really is. So, um, so I'm gonna in a moment I'm gonna turn it back over to Chris. I did want to say there's some additional reading that if you guys would like that I'll put in the chat. For the science of storytelling perspectives from cognitive science, neuroscience, and humanities by Frederick Lewis Aldama, who is an author and a university professor. And then there's another, Why Inspiring Stories Make Us React, the Neuroscience of Narrative by Paul J. Zach, who is a PhD author. So I will put those links in the chat at the end of the presentation. Oh, Chris already took care of it for us. So, and with that, we're going to turn it over. So we talked about storytelling. Now we're going to talk about learning theory, and then at the end, we're going to combine the two. So, and it looks like my camera got turned off. Sorry about that. So,
all right. So, well, now that Alvin has everybody's brains humming about stories and ideas, forgive me, because I'm going to yank you right out of the world of possibility and kind of set you right down into the boring, nebulous world of maybe this is how learning works. A place where we can say words like epistemology and transactional distance and cognitive dissonance without getting voted off the island. And my hope here is that after a very short time here in learning theory land, we're going to be able to better show the connection between learning theories, instructional design models, and the story in our later examples. So quickly, what is learning theory? So any theory really is an attempt to explain how or why something occurs. So when we're talking about learning theory, we're talking about trying to explain how or why people learn. And that being the case, we have to have some belief or philosophy about how change occurs in the mind of the learner. So making you guys work, I'm going to take a read of the room. If you want to put in the chat, what are some of your favorite learning theories? Which ones are you familiar with? Nobody. Anybody?
they're just thinking.
Oh, the thing, cognitive load theory, constructivism. Okay, good. Ooh, Malcolm Knowles.
Transactional distance, Michael Moore.
Yes, thank you.
Mhm.
One of my favorite. Okay, so we've got a few in there.
Have to mention Gagne.
Gagne's 9 events. Humanism, behaviorism, anybody? All right, so there's a bunch. Alvin's going to show you, yeah.
Ooh.
So this is a really neat piece of work by Richard Millwood that shows a bunch of learning theories and their relationships to one another. It's on his blog. We'll throw a link in the chat. Not right now though, because then you're just going to click it and stop listening. But so on this graphic, he includes about 20 or so, but it's definitely not exhaustive. So seeing as there are so many theories out there, let's talk about using theory as a tool. So there's a bunch, and we should recognize that they're not necessarily in competition with one another. And the main idea for us today is that depending on your desired outcomes, the context in which you're teaching, the location and culture of the learner or your organization, you might find that the application of one theory is more appropriate than another one, or more likely you're going to find that combining a couple of theories together or using more than one is going to serve you well. A word of caution, though, if the internet has taught us nothing else, it's that it's also important to consider what kind of evidence there is to support the theory. So we at Diamond, we like the classics, constructivism, which in part means involving the learner in the process and allowing them to test their assumptions, fail, and then retest, which that Twine example with bid is a perfect example of that. We're constantly asked to reach out and, oh, I think left, this means left. Oh, that's wrong. Maybe it means right. So we're building our own understanding of the information. We also like the cognitive load theory because it's based in neuroscience, and we like neuroscience. Using cognitive load theory, we can maximize the potential of our designs by taking into consideration limitations on working memory and the types of loads that we put on the brain to begin with. We're also going to be using today a narrative-based learning model, which is, I'm going to have to quote, it's a learning model grounded in the theory that humans define their experiences within the context of narratives, which serve as cognitive structures and a means of communication, which basically sums up what Alvin was talking about earlier, why stories are so darn good at teaching. The idea here is that stories are literally how we understand the world in the first place. So when we hear a story, we're in a story, our brain knows exactly what to do with it. A pile of information, big lists, not so much. So I know you're probably ready for some actual examples and hands-on. So we're gonna move over to finding focus and applying some learning theory.
So, like Chris said, first thing is finding the right story to tell. One that is going to align with our training goal or the training goal of your customers. So we need to make sure that the goal is specific and has measurable outcomes. So in this case, we're going to pull up an example from a course that we were asked to do. So the Office of Risk Management, they were having some problems with just the quality of the reports that they were getting from the program managers, and it was affecting the ability of the ORM, the Office of Risk Management, to truly put together a treasury wide risk profile. So in order to to measure the success of this training, we just we had to track the kind of the current, what's the duplication of effort that the program managers are experiencing, and why are the risks that are being reported sometimes not as robust as they should. So we worked with our subject matter experts to essentially discover their overall goal was to enable program managers to competently and independently apply enterprise risk management procedures. So the program managers, they needed to, at the end of the day, be able to complete their risk profiles, but in a way that effectively communicated with the the ORM. So to do that, we had to go through and figure out, okay, they needed to indicate where, when a risk has the potential to affect the enterprise, and in order to do that, though, they must understand the ERM model. So that was, we worked it out from the final objective backwards, right? The final objective was to have them complete a risk profile. But you can see the organic formation of the learning objectives, to understand the ERM model, to indicate when a risk has the potential to affect the overall enterprise, and then to complete the risk profile in a way that's going to effectively help the ORM, do its job. So, and in turn, that helps the other departments. So looking at these objectives through the lens of Bloom's taxonomy, and those, it reveals that we need to train all the knowledge levels and at all three understanding levels, so that we can have them apply what they've learned in a capstone exercise. So knowing what specific actions the program managers needed to take, or what they weren't taking, provided us with kind of a North Star, if you will, for the process. and it helps us to stay focused, which is what had mentioned before. So without that focus, it's easy to be led into designing a long and bloated course that learners get bored or frustrated with because they can't figure out how all this information is going to help anyone do their job. So it's easy to lose interest as a result, and then the business goal of the training is not met. So let's not do that. So before we move on, here's a couple of just kind of concrete examples of how we applied the learning theory. Looking at the example us on screen, taking what the goal was and just breaking it down into where we needed to start with the knowledge level and how we needed to help them get all the way understanding through apply. Um, you can see here just a concrete example of how the storyboard and what was written, how we translated that into a visual experience for them. So, in the actual course, we applied constructivist learning theory to teach the ERM model by offering opportunities for the learner to test their own understanding of the ERM model, fail, retest, and by identifying its constituent parts, in similar analogies. So, and this is one example of that. We also, sought to challenge the learners to identify the constituent parts of the model within a larger dialogue. What we're showing here, and that required them, that required though the ability for them to translate that concept from one domain to another, which was the second level of Bloom's taxonomy. So,
Hey, Alvin.
Mhm.
I'm laughing a little bit and smiling on this because you said test and retest. I recently took a course that my company made mandatory for me, and it was so incredibly difficult. I had to take the test. The company will probably hear me say this about 30 times. It was that complex before I finally passed it with an 8.0 score. How about that one?
Sounds like they needed to put something in front of that test.
Yeah, I was
to help
thinking-
you along.
They neted some storytelling for
Yeah.
sure.
I think for
Absolutely.
sure.
Yeah, thanks for that, Russ. That's
Oh,
a
sure,
great
anytime.
example.
Yeah, we like to let them test in ways that aren't necessarily a list of questions. Here's a situation where you have a chance to poke the content and say, is this going to react the way I think it's going to, or based on what you told me before? And if it does, then I understand it. And if it doesn't, then in which ways do I not understand it? So going through, iterating through that process helps the learner create their own understanding of the concepts. But I think we've spent enough time in theory land, and it's time to get down to combining our theory and our blooms and our objectives with actually making a story. So we're going to show you the next step in our process, which is story device mapping, which is basically where we take our training objectives that have been defined. I think we need to show the chart on the next slide. Yeah. So we take these objectives that we've defined in column 1, and then they're aligned with the Bloom's taxonomy. And then we come up with generic plot points that we think are going to help to reinforce those objectives there in column 2. So if we're talking about defining what enterprise risk management is, we think that having an event that leads to the exploration of that concept or a constituent part of that concept is going to be helpful. So we just put that in there. And then finally, we can start to pull together storytelling devices and character archetypes that we think are going to best move the story from one plot point to the next. So in the case of defining enterprise risk management, let's expose the character to one of the constituent parts, and maybe it means nothing to them. Maybe they don't even realize that they've seen it. And over time, as they start to see more and more of the parts of the concept exposed, we mix in a little more context, and then the whole concept is revealed. And then they have this, this moment but that can respond to, or they're forced to respond to. So that moves the story forward. And if you look there in the more story devices, or think of like any movie or TV show you've seen, maybe somebody has a dream or a conversation, or there's a character that's, kind of showing them the way. We draw from, we're not inventing these. So you can go on the internet and search, story devices and plot devices and come up with things that you think are going to help you ultimately teach what's in column number 1. And that's why we put this together, because we're going to use it as a reference, so that we stay focused and we're actually telling a story that teaches to the objectives of the course. So after we do this, we move on to brainstorming and world building. So
and just before we move off of this, I just want to also add. So if you think about, the way a screenwriter, they might write a screenplay or something like that. They have a format that they're looking at. The 3-act structure or whatnot, where you have an expedition. An exposition. You have a climax and that sort of thing. This story device mapping that you're looking at really is that for us. It really is, how do we go from you know a learning theory into taking a story and merging the two. So this really is our guide, and you're going to see that in the coming slides on how we did that exactly, and how we collaborated to do that. So starting with that, everything starts with brainstorming. So our story, it has to have a setting, and while your setting or your world should have the same characteristics as the one you're trying to teach about, when you're brainstorming, it wasn't about trying to figure out if that idea is going to work first, before you come up with a new one. So we wanted to be able to get as many ideas out, of our heads and onto screen as we could, because seeing one idea often leads to another idea. And Chris and I, we work really well together, and working with him, was really fun, which we encourage you to do, when you're doing, especially when it comes to storytelling, is to really collaborate or whatnot, because you're going to have different reactions. So we started with the definition of enterprise risk management, and the definition of and we're not going to go through to try and teach you that, but the definition of enterprise risk management was a process that addresses the full range of significant risks. So in brainstorming, we thought, okay, what type of system, what type of environment, would be conducive to that type of thing. So we came up with this list, being in traffic, because essentially, the full range of significant risks is looking at how do these things affect other people. If this risk affects me, could it also affect a different department? So traffic is definitely one of those things, right? If I'm driving like a maniac, or if I'm driving too slowly, or if I'm on my phone, that definitely affects other people. A neighborhood, a city, the NFL, any sports league for that matter. The woods or forests, a business, the nation, apartment building, all of these things, were different systems that we felt, just from a high level, could serve as a setting, for our story, that is going to, that ERM, the definition of ERM would fit.
how did we leap from sports leagues to the woods? That's the awesome thing about brainstorming, is you just don't know what your mind is going to do to react to what you heard first.
Right.
I'm sorry to interrupt.
We probably were thinking of our favorite team, the Badgers or something. No, but so, and but now that we have this, now that we brainstorm, now we have to think about, okay, now let's whittle them down. Let's poke at these to see if they're going to hold up to what our needs are for the story to teach. So to do that, we asked this question: can each of the constituent parts, of the concept we're trying to teach, be found within the proposed setting? So as I mentioned, the definition for enterprise risk management was a process that addresses the full range of significant risks. So taking, and that was, that was provided by a subject matter expert, or either from a prior course, in your case, as it may be. So taking that definition and asking that question, if for our example, we chose the forest, that was going to be our setting for our story. So now we have to put that through the fire though, and poke it and say, okay, what is a process? A sequential and ongoing collection, identification, assessment, and management of various organizational risks. Can a process be found in a forest? Well, sure. Animals in a forest have a process for spotting potential dangers and risks to their safety. Um, the second portion of it is, can the full range be addressed? And what does full range mean? It's the broader management level view in lieu of focusing solely on your own business unit. So can that be addressed in the forest? Well, the behavior of different species will affect others within their ecosystem, even if they aren't aware of others around them. So we felt like that checked off. And then the last part, are there significant risks that can be observed, that impact the goals and strategic objectives of the organization? So again, define risks that impact the goals and objectives of the entire organization. So again, we felt that a forest could serve that setting because there's many things that could put the forest at risk, flooding, fire, humans, etc. So having brainstorm different sessions, different systems and settings, and then put them through the fire of our process and poked holes in them, we decided, okay, this would be our universe for our story. Which brings us to, now that we have a setting, we have to have characters, right? If you're going to write a story, you have to have characters, and a character, you're going to need a hero or protagonist, someone who's going to actually learn what you're trying to teach them. And they're going to need some friends to help them along the way, someone that's going to help to promote, ERM, and then maybe an antagonist or someone who disregards ERM, to help the learner see what happens as a result of not applying ERM procedures. And that's where, so creating the characters was the next phase in our storytelling approach.
Yeah, this is probably my favorite part of the entire process because you get to invent whole people. And you get to make them whatever and whoever you want. I mean, we could just pick 3 names out of a hat, right? We had 3 characters. We could just pick 3 names out of a hat and assign a name to each character. But that doesn't really make a character, because without a persona, there's really no reason for any one of them to be doing anything. You don't know anything about them. So they don't have to be complete backstories, although, you'll probably wind up wanting to create one. But you should start with enough detail to sort of bring them to life. They won't be set in stone at first. You can add to them, take away from them as you need to. We did quite a bit of that as we said, well, what if this happens in the story? And I think our antagonist changed from a buck to a fox to a wolf, a half dozen different times for various reasons. But, they're kind of fluid in the beginning. And you can write whatever you want. You are the creator of the universe. So don't worry so much about what's good or useful when you first start. The learning objectives and the story device mapping that we did, those will keep you in line. Those things are going to tell you what's good and what's not good. So we came up with characters that you might find in a forest, because that's the world we chose. But if you, there they are. But you can choose whatever world you think is going to resonate with your audience and also be appropriate for your organization. So, it may not be cartoon forest animals. So we have Reginald, the hero. He is a rabbit. He is the youngest of 47 rabbits in his family. He's mostly ignored by his siblings and always causing trouble for his mom. Usually because he's very curious about the forest, he wanders off and gets lost. He loves cherries, which makes him somewhat of an outcast in his family, but you have to be who you are. So then we've got Bonnie, the ally. She's the oldest beaver in a family of loggers, the casters. She comes from a long line of beavers that help regulate the flow of water on the ERM River. And since she's the oldest, she's under a lot of pressure from her father to do things the right way, which really means his way. So she's not really encouraged to look at the world in new ways, but she does anyway. And this incongruity causes her some distress, and therefore she comes off as aggressive and uncaring. Now, I'm going to stop like reading these. You may be saying that is an awful lot of detail and information that has nothing to do with what you're teaching. So why spend the time to develop that? And the answer is because as you're writing the story, you can always look back at the persona and say, how would Bonnie react to that? Would she be upset? Would she be curt? Would she be gregarious? And so on and so forth. So it really takes the load off of trying to invent dialogue and details or reasons why the characters might be doing something. So I want to, on a serious note, not that that wasn't also serious, but is a very important thought I have about character creation. And that is that our default tendency is going to be to create characters who are like us. They look like us, they think like us, they've had our experiences, and we do it because it's easy and natural, and it's a great place to start. But I can't stress enough how important it is to try to create characters who are not like you, for a number of reasons. Not only is it important for everyone who's taking your courses to feel seen, but it makes for more interesting stories. And when people can see themselves in a story, they tend to remember it. I'm sure there's some psychology and learning theory around that, but I don't know those off the top of my head. If anyone knows those, throw it in the chat. The reason why seeing yourself in a story helps you to remember it. So anyway, with the personas in place, you can refer to the story device mapping template for ideas to help create a basic timeline of events, which is the next step. So in the story, the character's learning along with the viewer, and here's our story.
So, and this is the fun part for us, as you can tell. I'm going to pull up, you know, a list of the things that we created, the main plot push in the story, and these are these are what we use to connect back to the learning objectives. I'm going to pull up a screen that lists those for you, and we're going to kind of talk through them and show you how they map to the learning objectives you're trying to create. So, give me a second to do that. So, in our story, what again? I mentioned that this device mapping tool that we have here, or story device mapping that we use. This is how we started to create our story. You know, we had our setting. We chose the forest. We had our characters. We wrote personas for those characters to inform their behavior. So now it was time to link it all together and create a story that is going to be conducive to teaching and that aligns with the learning theory we chose, or the approach rather. So as I mentioned before, when we're talking about defining enterprise risk management and understanding that at a knowledge level, things are broken down into their component parts in order to understand what that means. We felt that the best way for our character to come across the three things the three component parts of enterprise risk management were process, full range, and significant risk. So we needed an event that was going to lead to the exploration of the concept. So how is our character going to find out about enterprise risk management? So in creating an event that leads to the exploration, we thought here's are some ways that you can do that. So you can expose the character to all of the constituent parts out of context. So in this situation, you can see the events here. We have Reginald. He fights with his parents and leaves home. He thinks he can make it alone. Reginald finds a bush of berries by the water's edge. He almost gets hit by a falling tree. Bonnie saves Reginald. Bonnie advises Reginald to abide by the ways of the forest. And here's the first place within the story, ERM, where and again, what I'm listing right now are just the events that happen. This isn't the script. This isn't what will be shown to your audience. This is helping you as a story creator um, organize your thoughts in a way that's going to then help you to create a script. So that's what this is here. And this piece right here, Bonnie advises Reginald to abide by the ways of the forest, ERM. In that exploration of a concept, this was the first place where we thought, here is a spot where Reginald can start to see something. So what was the first thing that he saw? You can see up here, he almost got hit by a tree. So that was a risk, right? Or whatnot. So that was, again, significant risk, full range process. That was the things we were always thinking about as we were doing this.
So you want to use your environment, your world that you've selected to tell you about all the different possibilities of things that can happen in the story. We're in the forest and we're trying to expose our main character to a risk. Well, I mean, what can happen in a forest? You got fires, you got trees falling, you've got predators, you've got, the list is endless. Just pick one, right? And then start writing. So when Alvin and I were working on this, I was working on the personas and I looked down on the document. He's already writing away. He's like, oh, we've got a name. So Roger, he's running through the forest and he's gonna get hit by a tree. And he's got all these dialogues. And then I'm like, okay, why is he running through the forest? What's happening? So we didn't even have the first few events until we've revisited that and asked those questions. So it's an iterative process where you start with the broad strokes, you put some things down, and then you start saying, well, why is he here? Or why is he doing that? Or why did she say this? And what is the next logical step? Okay, I think I'm done interrupting you, Alvin. Sorry.
No, that's great. And because as we go through this, so as we mentioned, build context. So right here, and still in the knowledge portion, still in the portion where we're leading, an event that leads to exploration of a concept. So all of these events are happening, and through this, Reginald is discovering significant risk. He's discovering what full range means. He's discovering what process means throughout these conversations that happen. And forgive me, I don't have, you can see this K here for knowledge. I don't have all of them marked, but throughout the conversations that he has with Bonnie, you can see, and even a conversation that he has with Rufus, he's learning about what it means to look out for more than just himself, but to consider the risks that other animals might face in the forest.
It's a really good story. I love it because Bonnie offers to try to help him, and Reginald's like, no, I am tired of relying on other people. I'm going to do this on my own. And he bumps into this grouchy buck, Rufus, in the forest. And Rufus is like, I just don't, sorry, I got distracted by the chat.
I want to be alone.
I just want to be alone. Leave me alone. Get away from my cherries. And then Reginald brings up Bonnie, and Rufus is like, Bonnie Castor? Like, they killed my family. So what happened? There's been an event. So you got to find out what's the backstory. And we find out later on that Rufus is just as much responsible for the death of his family as Bonnie's dad was. But you're gonna have to wait for the movie to find that out. But I think it'd be cool to show them and maybe read through some of the script. We only have a couple minutes left, so.
Sure, let's do that. So I'm gonna pull that up for you guys, and we will jump into some of the scripts.
All right. I'll be the narrator.
Alrighty.
All right. After getting into another argument with his parents, Reginald the rabbit hops angrily through the forest and decides he's had enough. This time he's leaving home for good. He finds himself adjacent to the mighty ERM River, the main life spring of the forest. Determined to make it on his own, to be someone special, not just one out of 47 kids. Everyone in the forest will know his name. Following the scent of a rare but very delicious variety of cherry, he stops and approaches a fallen tree. And then he hears a voice.
If you want to keep those hoppers, I suggest you back away, Peter Cottontail.
My name is Reggie.
Didn't you hear me? That log's going to roll any second now. Move.
Reginald hops out of the way seconds before the log splashes into the water.
Almost made rabbit stew out of you.
Sorry.
You should be. We at the Castor Shipping Company take safety very seriously. You standing out there, it constitutes what we call a significant risk.
Significant what?
Significant risk. Listen, Hopper, if we lose a bunny on our watch, we got to stop production. If these logs don't get cut, that dam down yonder is going to bust, and this here marsh gets flooded. What do you think happens if your burrow in this marsh gets flooded?
I'm going to stop for a second. So we've exposed him to a risk. And in that last bit, Bonnie's actually sort of starting to talk about the impact that risk has on their organization, on their operation, which is the logging operation. But later on in the story, we find out how the whole forest works as a system. But I guess we should stop there because we have 3 minutes and we want to take questions if there are any. And say thanks for letting us tell you about stories.
Yes, thank you guys.
I told you were Hollywood stars in the very beginning, and boy, I believe it now.
Yeah, we really love to take you guys through more because it is a big, robust process. But any questions you have, please shoot with the last few minutes that we have.
If we don't get questions, we're just gonna have to keep on writing the story.
I mean, can everybody hear me? I've been turning off my mic this whole time. This is Andrew.
Go ahead.
Yes, Andrew, we hear you.
Hey, so I just wanted to quickly, I already posted about this in chat, but I just wanted to confirm that, yeah, we have I'm very big on training evaluation. So criterion reference design, I actually brought out my book. I'm holding it like a Bible in front of me. Oh, here it is. Yeah, it's all bookmarked and dog-eared. So yeah, everything that we do. So this is back midway through the presentation. Everything that we do in regards to immersive testing elements, where we have knowledge checks that are kind of baked into the story, are all built on top of kind of a mesh framework of it could be translated into a criterion reference test. So I just wanted to make sure that we make sure that you guys, in applying these concepts in your training, make sure that you focus on, what are the outcomes? What is the learner going to get out of this? And how can we make this measurable and across, populations? And that's my 10 cents. I'm going to stop now because I could literally go on for another presentation.
Okay. I think one of the interesting things where you're always asking your characters to apply something, that gets back to andragogy and Malcolm Knowles. His main theory was always that you needed to be able to apply the content. So if you have a story and you remember it, it helps you apply the content and it stays with you. And the more you apply it, the better you stick it in different places in your head. And when it's time to retrieve the information, you get it back much quicker. So anything in the chat we should be looking at, Russ?
I think the chat has been very interesting today, Carla, and all of our speakers today have also been watching the chat. There have been a lot of interesting comments. Nothing jumps out at me. One of them was very, very long and looks very interesting.
I will warn people not to dive too heavily into alpha, beta, and gamma change unless you want to be very bored for a long time. It's a very interesting statistical concept, but yeah.
I missed that. Oh wow, that's the big.
Yeah, that's what Russ is referring to as my abstract.
Encyclopedia, Andrew.
Yeah.
But
Okay,
important.
well, if there are no other questions, we want to thank you all for joining us today, being part of FGDLA. We extend our thanks to Diamond Information Systems. Alvin, Chris, Andrew, thank you so much for being with us today. Fascinating information. And I know a couple of my students were in class. Brendan and Sarah, you're still here. So thanks for attending, and thanks to all the rest of you for being here with us today. That concludes this webinar. Thank you. Good night.
Thanks.
Thank you,
Thank
everyone.
you, Carla, and thank you to all the speakers and the panelists. Thank you very much. Impressive and very helpful.
All right. Thank you. Good night.